Hello, and welcome to another edition of Lucha Blog Explains a Thing, where I, the Cubs fan, Lucha Blog on Twitter, explain a thing about Lucha Libre using PowerPoint slides and not putting my face on the screen, because who wants that? Today we're going to do something as a repeat of last year, talk about the big trends in Mexican wrestling over 2023. I have a few slides. I think I have about 30 of them, maybe less, maybe more. What I'm talking about here are not like what are the best matches. They'll be listed those. Who are the best wrestlers? Will be listed those. We're trying to find out like if we put 2023 in the time capsule, what are the big stories? What are the things that we learned from 2023 that both greatly affected that year and may affect things going forward, or at least people will react to in Mexican wrestling. Um, we're trying to figure out what patterns, what things that came up. Sometimes they're a bit abstract. Sometimes this year, especially, it seems like it's more this thing did well, this thing did not do well kind of stories. But I want to go in deeper than just saying these matches got certain star ratings. So I want to tell you what this year was like, or at least tell what feels like it was like right now, and then maybe a few years from now we'll say, oh no, we missed the big thing. But in the moment, this is what the things that stuck out about 2023. Like I said, I did this video last year. This may be on the same channel. I may put this on a different channel by now. I have too many YouTube channels. That's a me problem. But last year's the six things I looked at last year were that Mexican wrestlers really started getting U.S. visas in 2022 and started popping up in U.S. promotions. That CML cut down the roster and focused more time on fewer people. That Lucha Libre itself started to go more behind paywalls and was less free and less accessible than it had been before. That AAA was trying to work into diversifying the revenue, where they weren't just relying on live events, but they were trying to get um, branded deals or like lucha libre adjacent ideas. Um, Another idea we talked about last year was Big Lucha coming into prominence as a place where that as a alternative wrestling brand, a place where talent could grow and they could try a different style of lucha libre than was being seen elsewhere in the indies. And the last topic came up was that the Mexican wrestling promotions really promoting the Mexican best of their promotions, trying to trying to tie themselves to the country that they're from in a stronger way. Some of those continued in 2023. Some of them reversed the other way as these things go. I have six trends again this year. We'll reveal them in pieces just to make this dramatic, even though like just uh, the obvious thing that if you've paid any attention to Lucha Libre, that the big story in 2023 CML had went up on us. There's recent history, like going back, say, 40 years, which is not really that recent anymore. There's been a few different periods we've isolated when Arena Mexico has had better business, where things have got better. They've had two real big booms. One was when, in the late 80s, early 90s, when Televisa started broadcasting the shows in Mexico for the first time in 30 years. That's a whole nother story for a whole nother video. But wrestling being on TV always produces a boom, and wrestling often, when they get into a new media form, they often take off, and that's what happened in the '80s. And they had lots of talented people; they were just overloaded with talented wrestlers and hot angles and good creative. The other real great boom of the last 40 years was the Mystico boom, where he just hit at the right time. He was the right person and booked very well, and with a great bunch of opponents to work with. They're I think wrestling fans, when they examine wrestling, they just see it's either everything's great or everything's bad or it's not like there's a middle ground. But there are like different levels of improvement that things can have. Sometimes they just take off like they did in those two periods, and sometimes there's like a more gentle upswing where things got better. They're not like selling out every arena, but the business has definitely gone on improvement, gone on the upswing. And there's been a few times it's CMLL has had that over the last 20 years. They had one success in the early 2000s when a group of wrestlers they were training called Grupo Cibernético started paying off of them with like new interesting wrestlers and guys who had been around for a few years in a bad period for the promotion figured out what they were doing, clicked with the fans, like shocker. really took off during that time, and that's why people still care about Shocker today, is because he was such a great star in the early 2000s. The mid 2010s, when Los Ingobernables came together, there was definitely an upswing in interest around there. It wasn't completely as strong as business for every place, but like obviously the bigger shows became big, and there was more excitement around Lucha Libre than it had been in a few years. And that's also another place where like um, a a new media came online, and in this case it was like CML worth started streaming more of the events live, streaming at all. So it was much easier to watch the promotion, especially if you were not invested. And that grew into bigger interest. That's about, you also could say right about when like the tourists started to come into play more as coming to Rimux, it became a cool thing to do. Maybe 2023, we're going to look back and say that was another upswing. It did not feel like a boom because like you can still see that there were plenty of shows that were doing okay or not even okay, but they were definitely having more big houses than they had in years prior, even prior to the pandemic. And they had like, we never know exactly what the attendance are for these shows, but you can feel like the average attendance seemed like it went up. It was not a huge like the whole Mexican culture is excited about lucha libre boom, but it was definitely where you could steady improvement year over year basis. Why did it happen? Why did it get better? Well, it wasn't just like a 1 year thing. There was, as we talked about in the 2020, as I talked about in the 2022 video, the groundwork was laid where they cut down the people they were using on the Friday night main shows to just focus on the better workers, the more exciting wrestlers. They streamline, they put more effort into their booking to have more things going on, that they weren't just that they were following up on feuds, that they weren't just starting angles without having an endpoint. Even if it was just like they were going to do a 3 week thing, they would always make sure to get to the end of the 3 week thing and get to another one just to keep people interested. They had a better group of talent coming through, both internally, and they started to improve connections with outside promotions. Some of that was the pandemic travel restrictions lifting, and that it was easier to get people in and around. Well, they were also seemed like they were building relationships with people they had not reached out to previously. Like the big end of 2022 thing was that they had brought Rocky Romero back in the promotion, and had a better access to people in New Japan. Once they had let the groundwork so that like if something happened, they had a lot of stuff supporting it to help it take off. And then in early 2023, they had one really good hot angle, one really good hot feud with between Rocky Romero as the troublemaking outsider, come from the past to battle the CML Technical C feud with 20 years ago, defeating cleanly Boulder Jr. and starting off a long series of matches between them that carried the promotion through the first half of the year. It was like there was nothing revolutionary about it. It was a very good match where CML ended up putting that match out for free for everyone, which was an exception during the year. And but it was the right match at the right time with the right people. People gravitate gravitated fans to take a look at the promotion who had maybe tuned off on it in the last few years, and they were able to they had infrastructure in place where like they were able to keep following up on that feud without worrying about shoving someone out because off of Friday night, because the focus was trying to put the best Friday nights possible. And once it was clear that match was going to be part of the best Friday nights, they just kept on going back to that feud. There was a lot of that. Like they realized what things were good, and they just kept on. Okay, we'll just keep on doing them as long as they work, and they kept working. Um, Misco had been very obviously more popular than he had been pushed since regaining that name. But in 2023, they really decided let's keep trying to do stuff with him. Let's throw a different opponent at him monthly just to see how that would do. And they had some good crowds from it. They saw that like the best events that Arena Mexico does are the Oma de Dos Leones, the Anniversario, the big named events. So they started to, you could tell that they were trying to creep a few more of those on the calendar. The big obvious one was a Fantastica Mania show they did at the end of June, where it's a big card with outside names, the people coming in, and the card being announced weeks in advance to build some anticipation. It wasn't like they didn't reorganize how they did business. They didn't like get rid of all 3 fall matches, although they did cut those out. They didn't get rid of trios matches. They just tweaked what they were doing to where it would appeal to the fans that were already interested more and would appeal more to people who kind of had tuned out of the promotion. That like they did enough to give it to a new look to what they were doing, and they had already improved their structure enough that like when those fans came back in, if they came back in for Voldo or Rocky Romero, there's plenty of other stuff that they would see and like if they stuck around for the whole card. So the big question is like, can this continue? And it looks like there's plenty of good signs. Um, everyone left. Most people left 2023 with really good feelings about the promotion because of various new stars being pushed because they got definite endings to feuds that they got really good matches, and it was like they really felt like annoyed after watching it in like a bad way. Maybe they saw the heel one and they wanted to see it as the technical one and they weren't happy, but they weren't like, this is stupid, I don't want to watch it anymore kind of feelings. They were easy shows, they were not deep shows, but they were like shows that you can enjoy without having to stress too much about it. And that's what people were looking for over in Mexico, literally, right? They also, it's not just the fans who seemed like they were into the promotion. You could tell that other promotions around the world were like had identified that something was happening in Arena Mexico and they wanted to be a part with it. That'll come up more in another slide later on. There's also the other positive sign is like whenever you're trying to grow a wrestling company, you need a steady stream of new stars to get people excited from. They spent 2023 getting a lot of people excited about Mascara Dorada 2.0, who's just now Mascara Dorada, and had been Panterita Del Ring Jr. before, as he took off as a single star and got big wins through the second half of the year. And you could start to see other guys start to poke their way through there from Neon, who like got a lot of attention with some of his matches and his GIF-worthy dives, or Zondakan Jr., who started to impress at the end of 2023, 2022, had a solid 2023, and then got some international exposure with New Japan. There's there's more people to watch. The problem with some past CMO hot periods, or even periods where it's just kind of even, is that like they've had a limited roster and there's only so many ways you can mix and match. Getting getting tired of seeing the same names, and this time they seem like they've been lucky or fortunate or prepared enough to have new people come in and new ways to mix it up. And they've been able to keep it. Looks like they're going to be able to keep things fresh for a while to come. The what signs that I'm not sure about that's going to keep us away is that it's still a promotion that like is driven by the big feud, the big match everyone wants to see. And once the Templario Dragon Rojo feud ended, once Rocky Romero finally lost the title, there's really not the obvious big program that they have right now. It would say it it's possible that something that, well, it's only January, so something may come up, something that's not obvious now may be obvious later, but they don't have something sitting there waiting for them like they've had in the past. Another issue is the lack of accessibility. Starting with July 2023, CMLL has really put all of their shows behind one paywall or another, actually 2 different paywalls. And one of the great big advantages of the past years is that like anyone with an internet connection could watch a show. At one point, you could watch the Friday night show for free live. Later, you could watch it maybe at a week or two delay, but you could always stay up with the product pretty easily just by going to YouTube. And now you can still do that, but you can have to pay $9 a month, which is a huge ask for people. And they have seemed like they've had some success in converting people to paid viewers, but I think if there were not quasi or not even quasi legal ways to go around the paywall and find those matches for free, I'm not sure that they would have had the same international buzz that they've had this year. And the other issue that's looming for them is that like when you narrow down the talent to focus on fewer people on Friday night shows, that means that you also but that means that there are some people like if you cut focusing on 40 people and you have 100 people roster, there are gonna be people some people don't understand that and they're just gonna want to make into that 40 people higher A team, and there's some people who feel like they should already be on the A team based on what they've done before. They're going to be annoyed and either cause problems or leave. And it's for the best for the roster to do this way, but it's also going to it's the best for the show to do this way, but it's also going to take management of people's expectations and happiness. We've seen already that Necrocostas left the promotion in early 2023, and one of his reasons for leaving was that he felt like he was no longer being utilized in the way that he should. And you can see other veterans who have just kind of been pushed to the least significant shows where they expected in previous years that they would be forever part of the important stuff. So how that's going to play out, if how fans are going to feel, if some of their old favorites aren't going to say that they're unhappy or leave, is going to be a big question mark going forward. I think CMO strategy makes sense, but that doesn't mean it's going to be an easy strategy to stick with. So the counterpoint to CMO being on upswing is AAA not having this. In fact, we have to start with the article that summed up the year, or maybe two of them. In July, Conan spoke to the Record media outlet newspaper. They might not actually be publishing actual physical newspapers, but they're a newspaper. They're a sports daily, talking about Triple Mania, about about how great AAA is doing this year, talking about that they plan to expand this next year and they're going to take themselves to another level, and we're going to be huge changes. They're not even any competition for CMLL. They're going to be competition for the big promotions in the USA. That's where the battle's going to happen. We're going to have great talent and great stories. That's what they were saying mid-year. By January, we had Dorian Raildon saying that, 2023 kind of wasn't any good, but it was a rebuilding year. It was a year, all the great sports teams have years that are down too. And we just had a down year, but we're going to make some changes and we're going to get even better. So from CMLL is not any competition to us, a line that was repeated many times during the second half of the year, to we kind of suck, but we're definitely going to be better. We've definitely fixed it in 2020. That's how it kind of went for AAA. AAA, it's not like AAA was ever like a perfect promotion. They were at times people turned into Triple Mania because they wanted to see the car crashes. They wanted to have a fun bad time. They saw a fun bad promotion, something that like had obvious flaws but was like wild enough that it made up for it. I think at some point AAA became self-aware of that, like that they were a fun bad promotion, and decided, oh, we can just get by, just keep on doing it. We'll lean into that. And by becoming self-aware, they actually switched over to just being a bad promotion, where like they they weren't bothered by their own mistakes because they figured, well, everyone expects us to be bad, so we don't really have to be good at doing things, and that just made them even worse. The Triple Main themselves were disappointment shows. The Mexico City final one, the worst of all three. Uh, the like 2022, the three Triple Mains were both around the tournament. 2022 had Volano 4 having an epic series of matches to like he was clearly going to lose this mass tournament from the moment it was announced, but he bailed so hard and he impressed so much that it actually made it better that he was losing because he was putting his everything into to trying to push off the inevitable. There was no great story like that in the 2023 feud. It was a shell game of like we're doing this tournament and we'll definitely have a singles match at the end. To oh, I guess it's going to be a four-way now because we didn't a tag match ended up in the tie, and we had no we had no remedy for something that was completely possible. And then the final four-way match makes absolutely no sense, and the finish has tons of interference. It's just a complete mess by the end, where it's a terrible match where no one gets over and the finish is completely unclear to the point even the announcers are confused on the finish. It was it was such a difference from the year before, and it it, it was something that really illustrated the difference between the two promotions because both CMLL and AAA were really building a year around a foreign heel feuding with a top Technico, and the foreign heel is going to lose this here in the end. And in CMLL, they trusted Rocky Romero to do what he does best and just kind of let him come up with his own ideas and wrestle and stay out of the way of his matches. Well, while in AAA, they really did not trust Sam Adonis. I think he gave it all and tried his best at it, but they also thought we can't do Sam Adonis Psycho Clown. That's not strong enough a match. While CML thought Boulder versus Rocky Mirror was definitely going to be a stronger match. Um, so instead of just doing Adonis Psycho Clown, they had to find ways to wedge LA Park and Rush into it, and then you get all the messiness and overbooking and ways to protect yourselves or ways to make sure it look like you get your hand raised when you didn't get your hand raised. Look, you didn't lose when you actually did lose. Those guys that just took away from whatever Sam Adonis and Psycho Clown were going to do. I mean, in the end of the 2020 tournament, Bolano Ford came out looking like the most important person, even though he was the big loser at the end. At the end of the 2023 tournament, Sam Adonis lost and was clearly shown not to be at anyone else's level when it was supposed to also be his big moment. They didn't capture the emotion and they didn't capture the quality match they had previously. They also AAA also had issues with talent departures. Um, they had they lot where Phoenix and Penta and Dragon Lee were all showing up on TV in 2022 and having really good matches. Those guys were generally unavailable. Phoenix did not work in AAA at all. Dragon Lee was gone to WWE. Penta was in a little bit, but Penta didn't have as much impact. And even like younger guys who I'm sure they thought assumed would be along for a long time, like Commander and Vikingo, weren't as available to them this year as past years. Bandito, who was a big part of their 2022, ended up out of the promotion by 2023. And that doesn't mean that AAA still didn't have good workers, but they had people who had been treated on these big shows as completely immaterial or just guys to fill out undercard matches who they could not push as stars and did not themselves not see them as stars. So they never gave them the chances to have the great matches either. And it was just all where you could say that, well, maybe this main event angle doesn't make any sense, or maybe this what they're doing with the foreigners doesn't work for me on the show, but at least I saw this great match with these other guys, and they were not having those great matches with those undercard guys. If you wanted to see those great matches with the undercard AAA guys, you eventually found them like in places like GCW or places like West Coast Pro, but they were no longer AAA themselves were not giving you the good AAA matches, and that was a big change in the year. Most of the problems though are like creative problems or critical problems. The business was not terrible. Like the three Triple Manias did all respectable attendances. The Lucha Libre World Cup in Guadalajara seemed a little bit down from previous years, but it was still a pretty good number for AAA. It was the other shows that seemed like they did not draw as well. A September show in Mexico City drew a shockingly low house for a AAA show in their home base. They had other tapings later that year where you could see very small crowds suddenly. It varied from location to location, but it was clear that like something had changed. That they were not if they went to places where they were giving away tickets or traditional lucha libre strongholds, it still did pretty well, but they were had lost some sort of edge, and part of that is losing some of those bigger names, that not having them around as much, and replacing them with people they had not built up as decent or important replacements. But as we talked about last year, AAA's big plan was also like they didn't just want to be in the ticket selling business; they wanted to make money from different avenues. And the problem in 2023 is a lot of those avenues seem like they did not work out as expected. The Marvel Lucha Libre stuff seems completely dead. They'll still promote, like there's still some merchandise sitting around that they're still promoting. So you can find these glasses, you can find um, other old Funkos still on Amazon to buy, but they're not making any new content. So that thing seems like a something that they've all moved on from. They this time last year they were AAA was still talking about this big plan to run an important show in Los Angeles in WrestleMania weekend, and you may remember no show happening in Los Angeles for AAA in WrestleMania weekend. The other people involved that may have gotten cold feet at dealing with AAA, and so you could see AAA people plenty of times in Los Angeles, but you could not see them on a AAA show themselves. They AAA had a great deal in 2022 where they were selling sold shows to Monterey Show Center Arena and other mall kind of structures around Mexico, and doubling some of those as their TV tapings. And most of those seem to like quietly disappear in 2023. The two show center events they did run did pretty well, but it's like, for reasons I don't even understand, they just ran a lot less of them, even though they were said to be successes in 2022. The big plan for 2023 was Lucha Titlan, a themed restaurant entertainment show, action adventure show along the lines of like Lucha Libre cross with medieval times, if you had to put it someplace. And AAA spent the first half spent 6 months working on it, longer 6 months, much longer, building towards debuting that in Cancun in early March, and got a lot of attention for it at first. Had a big opening, and then you could tell that suddenly, if you look for at the venue on social media where people are going, you would see these very small crowds attending the shows, and over time, you could start to see Lucha Titlan tickets being discounted, more pushing of the product on AAA TV itself to try to get people interested, and eventually, even though the idea that Lucha Titlan would have its own wrestlers and completely independent from AAA and be this different structure, by the end of the year they started bringing bring in Lucha Libre AAA wrestlers as special attractions to these Lucha Titlan shows to try to get a few more people to show up, try to make them bigger events, which did seem to work. They did have good attendance for when the AAA guys would show up, but that defeated the purpose, which is like, this is supposed to be something for casual fans who don't even know any luchadors to go to. And if you're relying on bringing in the star AAA names, then that's something that's not sustainable. That's not something that's like expandable. And that's also saying something that you might as well, instead of spending all this money on this expensive restaurant and lease and whatever else, why aren't you just running normal once every month AAA shows in a normal arena instead at a much cheaper price? When the Lucha Titlan first show was launched in Cancun in March, the other investors, AAA just won, but they had partners on this, talked about, we're so excited about this project. It wasn't just like the Cancun thing was going to be a success, but they were eagerly debating which other venues, which other cities would immediately get their own Lucha Titlan. They had, they talked about Tijuana, they talked about Acapulco, they talked about a whole different cities, but it was just like, as soon as they got this one up and running, they were going to go launch two more. They were going to franchise this idea out, and that's what was a talk in March. And 9 months later, there's no talk like that at all. There's no like, this is an idea that we're going to run with. This idea we're definitely ready to take to other places. It's not completely doom and gloom because they have shown some success when they bring in those AAA names, and no one's saying that it's going away. But it's clearly not what people AAA included were thinking they were getting when it started. It's like, as much as we are disappointed about like the AAA creative and the matches and stuff, I think this is the failure of Lucha Titlan to live up to its expectations. It's probably their biggest disappointment because that was going to be a new way of doing business, a new way of bringing money, and it does not look like either of those things have panned out, at least in the short term. It doesn't look like they're giving up, but it also means that it was not the success at the speed that they were hoping for either. So where does it leave AAA going forward? I think like anytime I talk about AAA to people who actually care about AAA, which is increasingly small amount as this year has gone on, they really want different creative. They want different people in charge, and there definitely could be used different ideas. And it'd be interesting what would happen if someone else was in charge. But the creative isn't fixing everything. There's underlying problems um, about the big concept, about having better execution of ideas more than even having ideas themselves. It's one of the problems with AAA is that like they constantly give ideas for different people feuding with each other, different people setting up different matches, but they never follow through on the matches. And it doesn't matter who's coming up with the ideas or who's deciding who's going to push. If you don't follow up and go anything with it, you're just going to have people lose all interest in what you're doing. If you keep promising to do something and you don't deliver on it, people just aren't going to listen to your promises anymore. Um, but there's still like the bigger picture things that they need to hit better. I don't know. I know that AAA is running multiple Triple Manias this year. I assume it's three. I probably could ask someone, but I have not asked. But they have to have a better unifying concept for Triple Mania than this what they did for this year. They can't do a tag team feud. I think I would say I would lean against doing a tournament that carries through the three because the last one was so bad. And unless you have a winning idea, it's just not. It the concept itself is not strong enough to do just to do the concept. You need the good matches to make the concept work. The concept of someone loses at the end alone is not important enough. I don't think at this point. Um, but like from AAA's perspective, it's not a creative issue. It's more they want, like Conan said in that piece in July, they want to compete with the promotions in the U.S. That's always been his goal. That's always been Jordan Rodin's goal. They want to. They see there's the money to be taken in the U.S. and they believe that if they had an opportunity to do with their guys in the U.S., that they would blow everyone away, or they would at least make a good income for themselves that they can't make in Mexico. They would add on to what they do in Mexico. The problem is that like they're never gonna be able to do it with their own guys as it is because their own guys get picked up by somebody else. Their Phoenix and Penta get picked up by AEW. Bandito gets picked up by AEW. Commander gets picked up by AEW. Dragon Lee gets picked up by WWE. It's without having much more money coming in, they're not being able. Anyone they develop, they're going to have risk that a major promotion in the U.S. is going to take them away from them. Um, the one way to handle it is to do the CMO way, where they're constantly trying to find new people, trying to bring up people, and a lot of periods where they can't find those people, and things are going to go down for them, and then they will come across a new batch of guys, and you'll have a Massacre Dorada 2.0 to replace a Massacre Dorada, and you'll get people who've gone elsewhere will come back, and you'll be able to build on them like a Mystica. Um, CM, that's where CML has been better at like trusting the new people and getting them over, where AAA is good at finding talent. They have a lot of people hanging around who are good. They have people that they have just found in the last month that are probably coming in that will also be good. But building them up to be stars is something that they have struggled with. And by the time they do that, they it may be too late. Like I'm sure AAA thought they had much more time with Commander than they have when he got signed by AEW early this year. And but they are, even though they are more progressive in certain aspects of trying to modernize themselves, they are a conservative promotion when it comes to pushing new wrestlers and taking chances on the top. And without being more aggressive in that point, they're going to not be able to develop enough stars to replace the ones they keep losing. But in their viewpoint, they just need the more money so they can hold on to these stars more often. And it needs, if it's not coming from U.S. and if it's not coming from the Lucha Titlan side project, it's hard to figure out where it's going to come from. They either need someone to come in and help fund the promotion to give them the money to be compete. They need not their own Tony Khan, but their own person, company who's interested in wrestling, who sees the same potential that AAA does, is conquering the U.S. market if they just had more money to do it right. Or they need to change how they do things and maybe limit their goals a little bit, that they're trying to focus more on Mexico, they're trying to build themselves up rather than go for each of these moonshots. But AAA's history is that they'll keep going for moonshots. Maybe Lucha Underground did not work, but they'll talk to some other promoter about running the U.S. and they'll run Arizona once and never run it again, or talk to they'll talk to a promoter about running New York, and they'll have this great idea that they'll run this series of NBA venues, and then they'll announce two of them, run once, and then never again. Or they'll keep coming up with these big ideas that if they hit like a lottery ticket, they're made. But they also keep putting the promotion in a slightly bigger hole every time they don't make it, both in expenses but also in reputation. AAA has sadly become the promotion that's always crying that we're going to the USA, we're going to make it this time, and then falling back and not making it. And you would hope that like they've got to break that cycle somehow. But I think I'm not really sure if they have the management that's willing to make that change. I think they're just stuck on we've got to keep going this way because this is the only way to survive. The third trend I saw from this year was CML focusing more on their women's wrestlers. There were at least three shows that they ran that were all women's shows. Something that had only happened once the previous year. There might have been a fourth one. I just keep forgetting about in Guadalajara. But they ran two Guadalajara shows. One was a tribute to retired wrestler Irma Gonzalez, who like is in the short list of most important women's wrestlers in the history of Mexico. They also ran two LFN Lucha Femenil Nation shows that were built around the Women's Grand Prix when they had more women from outside the company in, so that made it easier to run an all women's show. But beyond the guest stars, there's also a focus more on the women that they do have. You can look back at it and see that they were kind of building this point, maybe on purpose, maybe not. We're coming right out of the pandemic. They built the the most consistent wrestlers on the roster sort of being pushed and being focused on were Las Chicas in the Mahablays, Lluvia and Jarachita, the long running national tag team champions. And they just won all the matches. They looked dominant. They were, even though there were singles women's champions around, these two women were clearly the stars of the division because they were the ones who got more of the big matches and came to do more. And when they had other tournaments, they would also do well. This past year, they they focused more on Stephanie Bakur and the returning Zuxis, who came back to the promotion after a spot was open when Dallas and Negro Casas left the AAA. And they've become, because they built up Juve and Jared Chita, they need rivals, and these two women were natural rivals for the women they had spent the last years building up. And Bakur was so good that they kind of, when the women's singles title opened up, she was like the obvious person to win that title, and luckily the fan vote put in that place. She also made a huge impression in New Japan USA shows and in other opportunities she had through the year. The focus on fewer people on Friday night shows even was narrow, even more narrow on the women's division. So that those four women, Yuba Jerty to Stephanie Berker and Zixis, seemed like for about 6 months it'd be those four and then a partner for each. And every Friday night or every other Friday night, those women over and over again. And I'm sure that ticked off the other women who were not making those Friday night appearances and not getting those Friday night paydays, but did a lot to make those four women look like the real stars instead of a division that's traditionally been more flat and balanced. It was like those four women were on a higher level than everyone else that was around. You can see that they're continuing to try to bring in more women to keep that top group fresh. Andromeda, who is someone who was briefly in AAA and took the lay of the land and saw how things were going and had a natural affinity to earn Mexico for other reasons, decided to make the jump over there. And she's clearly worked out for the CMLL. And there are other women who have shown improvement, who have come into the division. But beyond the people who are just early in Mexico City, the bigger story is that there's been an effort to train and find and train more women from the territories, the smaller promotions that CMLL works with. The group in Puebla, where there's never been a woman from Puebla to be a regular Mexico Arena Coliseo wrestler until this year. Um, they they noticed that had not happened, that there had not been a Puebla woman who'd come to the main roster. The promoter in Puebla got Pegaso, longtime CML Technico, to find some women, train women, and see which ones like made the cut to be at least close enough to be considered to wrestle for CMLL shows. And they started with like 24 women. it got down to 8 left, and those 8 have been slowly appearing on Arena Public shows, and a couple of them have appeared on Arena Coliseum and Arena Coliseum Guadalajara. And that was like an effort that the promotion would have not even thought to have made a few years ago. Same thing in Arena Coliseum Guadalajara. It hasn't been explained as thoroughly, but there's clearly like a dozen or so women who have been recruited from both Guadalajara itself and neighboring states, and even people coming in from Mexico City because they see that there's an opportunity in Guadalajara, and they've been given spots to younger, less experienced women on these shows, on the Guadalajara shows for all year. You can see some of them have taken advantage of those opportunities and shown steady improvement to the point where they may make a couple of them have made the regular Mexico City roster. Um, this has been a big problem for Mexican wrestling for as long as I've followed it. You always hear about these training classes that are like 20 men and 2 women or 1 woman. The recruitment and to get women into lucha libre is a problem. The ability to keep them interested in lucha libre when they're dealing with um, it's a culture that can be very sexist and that cannot and often does not give opportunities to women, or definitely does not give big opportunities to women. It's still rare for a women's match to main event or even semi-main CML or any lucha libre show. So the natural inclination would just like for a promotion like CML would be just to the women want to be interested in the lucha libre will be happy to take them, but they're not going to go and search them out. And this has been a radical shift where they want, for their own reasons, they want to be more proactive about bringing women into the promotion and showing that and putting them on their shows. It's just the one mystery is that they haven't really explained why they've been more interested in it. There's clearly more interest in women's sports in Mexico than there has been in the past. I'm always surprised about how much I see about like the women's soccer league when that was not something that was even discussed years ago. But I think what fans have found for that is like, yes, it's women's soccer, but there still are America, our Chivas, our Tigres, and it just happens to be women playing for our team instead of men. But because they're still our team, we're going to support them all the same. And maybe CML sees an opportunity that they can do the same thing. As long as they have talented women under their logo, they might find a new group of supporters for it. There's also like been this consistent rumor that CML may be interested into running their own like not spin-off promotion but sub-brand promotion that might be just women's focused, and that's why they're looking for all these women's wrestlers. But we have not seen any official sign that's the case. But it's clear that they're trying to greatly increase the number of women they have around for some reason or other. I'm not convinced that this is going to stick as a trend because just the history of CML, a promotion that's killed its women's division multiple times over the years, is not great. It's noticeable that like they have these special training classes going in Puebla and Guadalajara, and they've run women's only shows in Puebla and Guadalajara. And even though they run 4 different shows a week in Mexico City, could easily have done a women's only show on any one of those shows, any one of the 200 shows they run this year. They've not taken that leap. So there may be some resistance in the home office to actually going all the way with women uh, for focusing on them. But there's clearly some push to do more with them. So I don't know how it's going to play out. I could see like someone getting cold feet, or someone saying, or some men saying, "Well, we're not getting the opportunities that we used to, so we need to make some changes here." Or I could see that this is continuing to trickle up to something bigger down the road. Just at this point, though, it's an interesting trend just because it's so unlike what the promotion has done. It's not even something where like you can point to a business case where those 3 women shows I showed you did any better than usual. Some of them seem like they did a little bit less than usual, but for the long term, it might be pay off just to go down the route and see if you can develop a new star, if you can bring in people who are not interested in lucha libre with the men, but maybe they'll be interested in women. If you can make it more attractive or welcoming to come for a women fan or a tourist if they see women on the show, instead of just seeing 6 men's matches. I don't know, but is something. It does seem like it's an active goal of CML to have more women, and I'm kind of interested to see how that plays. The fourth trend is like increased international exposure and success for Lucha Libre outside of Mexico. Among the things that happened in 2023 was El Hijo del Dr. Wagner won Noah's GHC National Championship and had a long and well-received reign. Diamante, who's now known as Luis Mate in Dragon Gate, won their main title, the Open of Dragon Gate champion. And Titan went to the finals of New Japan's Best of Super Juniors tournament. Any one of those things on a different year would be like the easy crowning achievement of a Mexican wrestler elsewhere. Mexican wrestlers do not win main titles in Japanese promotions or U.S. promotions for that matter. They do not have long reigns with titles. Even stuff like Daga winning the junior title or Dragon Bane Alpha World having the junior tag titles in Noah, those would be exceptional events in most years. But because it's just a bumper year for Lucha Libre talent elsewhere, and it's also a specific promotion in Noah that seems to be heavily booking Lucha Libre in a way that no one really has in years in a mainline uh, Japanese promotion. Elsewhere, Commander, Viking, and Gravity have become like pretty much regulars in AEW Ring of Honor. Vikingo made his long-awaited debut in April and instantly got over like everyone knew he would. Commander, no one I don't think really expected to see him in AEW until he got his name announced in the card and then killed it in his first two matches. Gravity is another one where I think everyone's surprised and maybe still surprised he got a regular role there, but it's obviously it's his best. It's so far ahead of schedule that he's just lucky to be there. But we've got to the point where like 2009, 2020, 2021 Ring of Honor Sinclair days was I had to follow Ring of Honor because you never know they could have a cool Lucha Libre match on like any show or Lucha Libre show, and then like 2 years later we're somehow in the same place with a completely different Ring of Honor and different owner, but you have to watch a Ring of Honor show because they could have a cool Lucha Libre match at any point. Meanwhile, WWE's also done more with Lucha Libre. I will forever be cynical about them paying off at any of it. But Dragon Lee did come in. He's done well in XT. He's got made it to the main roster. They've WWE's done a lot with the LWO group and put those guys on the main roster from the Joaquin Wiles and Cruz del Toros to doing a long Rey Mysterio Santos Escobar feud. It's in the end of the day, I believe that's just going to be Rey Mysterio, the only one that they're going to trust and focus on. But at least for the moment, they're giving those guys chances. So they've Angel Garza and Humberto Carrillo, who may or may not have last names at this point, are back on the main roster. So it's more Mexican wrestlers getting a shot than it has been in quite a while. And then on the indies, it's like there's not a weekend that seems like goes by where it's not Gringo Loco and two of Aries Latigo and Toxin versus uh, three different Technicos in GCW, or it's a four-way match, or it's something happening in West Coast Pro, or it's Prestige, or it's some other indie promotion. It's a regular occurrence that they're just great indie matches. They're great Lucha Libre matches on these indie shows, as almost taken for granted at this point, where it was like a novel thing, maybe in years past. It's something where like everyone still likes the matches, but they're not no, but they like them so much and they've been good so much. It's not a surprise that they're good. It's stuff that people are looking forward to now when they see them on the card. Um, I guess maybe the biggest surprise is CML suddenly becoming friends with all sorts of different promotions. They had the long New Japan deal, but I don't think anyone at the beginning of 2023 would have seen them having a deal with MLW or AEW, or I forgot to put Rev Pro on there, but that one's the one that most is like I. In no way did I imagine that there was going to be a Fantastic Mania UK with Hechicero versus Michael Oku as a real thing that happened. It the growth of them from different sources. You could say that the MLW stuff, AEW stuff comes through the New Japan stuff, but it's Rocky Romero's involved in those stuff. But Red Pro that just came out of nowhere. Um, the, there's also increased presence point where of CML wrestlers on the New Japan shows where they're expected to be in one or two matches everywhere. Some of it's Stephanie Bashir just doing really well in her first match, but it's like de rigueur to have CML tag or trios match on the undercard of all these shows. They are a more regular part, and they are usually getting a good reception for the matches. It's one of those things that have helped the perception of CML. The problem is it's helped the perception of CML. And I'm not really sure that AAA feels like it's helped them as much. They're not as much connected to the matches outside of maybe Hiro Vikino will defend his title in a match that they won't even promote, that AAA won't even promote. So I'm not sure they see it as a big deal. It's like they may see it as these guys are having good matches elsewhere. Why aren't we getting the same attention for those matches here? Which is the great TNA Ring of Honor dilemma of 2 decades ago, where the TNA wrestlers would kill it in Ring of Honor and talk about how great Ring of Honor is, and TNA would quietly feel it. And I kind of wonder if AAA not promoting these matches and maybe eventually taking a bigger part of them is going to actually lead to the same thing where the TNA wrestlers in those TNA promotion pulled their guys back out of Ring of Honor at different points. That we may see that AAA wants to have a bigger, gain more out of it one way or another, or stop them altogether because they're not getting as much out of it as they thought, and like other places getting credit for their wrestlers is always something that's a tough pill to swallow. For the rest themselves, they're getting obviously better pay and better conditions, but they're also putting themselves in environments that they're not used to. I think the lucha libre talent in AEW has not always gone to everyone's. Even going back to Phoenix and Penta before the recent trip, not everyone's been happy with how they've used. I've been happy with how they use, and there's a different set of expectations about coming up with your own creative, um, marketing yourself, and being ideas, not just in the ring, but setting up angles where that's just completely foreign to how Mexican wrestlers are used to working, where they just show up, they do the match, they if someone actually has an idea for an angle, they do the angle, but they're not responsible for coming up with their own angles, their own ideas, and I think that's a culture shift among others that's been hard to bridge, and a reason why those guys haven't done much. I mean, if you don't have stories and you just do matches, that's kind of what the Vikingo experience has been, and Commander's experience is more been plugging in when a match needs a good opponent. He can do that, but that means he loses a lot against a lot of good opponents. There's not been the creative growth into these characters as has gone to others, and I'm not sure how much that's AEW's responsibility, or how much of that's in the wrestler's responsibility, or how much of it is AEW's responsibility for not explaining to the wrestlers that is their responsibility. But there's a there's a lesson there are adjustment that needs to be made that just has not been made. The fifth thing I'm going to bring up, and these are not in any order, except if you like them in that order, then they're in the correct order. Fifth thing I'm going to bring up is the Mexican indie scene really kind of stagnated or even taken a step back in 2023. It's a problem where there is, like LA Park and Rush are really, really good. And what they did with the Brass was really good. But now you have a scene where everyone is trying to be either LA Park or Rush. And cards where it's main event or in semi-main, like the only thing that they're advertising in any Arena Neza, Arena Lopez, or even Arena Capan shows, a match where they're going to try to emulate LA Park or Rush. They're not going to say they're going to do that, but Persero and Demon Inferno and the Traumas are a clear Ingobernables riff where we're the baddest guys. We're going to work as a group and we're going to make sure we never lose. And we got a lot of people cosplaying as LA Park. It's just crazy, wild brawlers who will go in the crowd and throw things around. Some of them were pig masks. Some of them were like rhino masks. Some of them are Diamante Azul or other people who used to be in AAA, just kind of doing the Rush act. And in 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 doses, it's stuff that can be fun and interesting, but it's the same guys doing the same things, and some of those same things had already run then when Rush started wrestling a lot less in Mexico. It's like, at some point, you want to see a finish to a match that's not DQ, mass ball, foul, referee gets hit, no one loses, everyone loses. We all make challenges for this mass match that we're never going to do every single week. There's something that CML has figured out where like they do very short feuds. Sometimes important people lose, but they're not really hurt from it because they had a good match, and everyone forgets about it by the time they go to the next feud, unless it's the big feud at the end of in the middle of the year. With Indie Mexico, it's we can't ever do the end because if we take one clean loss and we admit we lost, we completely devastate. And I don't think it really works that way. And but it also makes that there's no everything's we're going to solve the end of this next week and solve the end of it next week and solve the end of it next week and like eventually you're just seeing the same movie over and over again and no matter how good the movie is you see it that many times it's going to be less appealing. The big thing I was hyped and happy about last year was Big Lucha being this great base of talent, this great alternative, and 2023 kind of it didn't completely fall apart, but you could see that it's troubling pretty badly. Bandito had a falling out with the owner of the promotion. Commander left in January. Galena Lomao left with Bandito. A whole bunch of people just kind of weren't happy with chances they were getting, felt, or thought they could do better on their own, or just got wanted a quicker route to the top elsewhere. And the talent the talent departures have been pretty bad. The people the replacements, which are more like the same indie guys we see on the other shows, have been disappointing. The one big appeal of Big Literature was it was a self-contained thing with new focus on newer wrestlers, focus on people you didn't see elsewhere, and partly by choice, and maybe even partly because they needed to find someone. They inclusively relied on the same guys who work all the other indie shows, and it's made the promotion less special. And it doesn't seem like it's really helped their business in any way. But it's been very more example is more what the remaining promoter wants the promotion to be in his favor. So at least it's appealing to one person. Um, then also at the end of the year there was a big AAA talent search, and there's a ton of big lucha people involved, and it's a, you wonder how many of those people AAA is going to end up scooping up, even though none of them actually won. Enough of them press enough that you expect that they will be seeing them in AAA, and with some people trickling out AAA itself, those are make easy and maybe cheap additions they can use to rebuild their roster. They're just really like if you do not like the um, the style of the Shamas and the Pigs and Indies, there's really not a great alternative to go to. IWG is they a lot of IWG stuff where they're like they're booking themselves as a mini AAA where they have all these sorts of feuds that don't go anywhere and get dropped before they finish or they just get drawn out forever. That's the heavy on the same brawling style as elsewhere. They're trying to express themselves as if they are a third promotion of that's different from the indies, but they also book in all the same guys from the indies that they, except the ones who they are personally mad at. It's there's not a great. They have a few interesting people, but there's not a great difference between them and the other groups. A lot of the smaller niche promotions just did not have they even if they had good years creatively or critically, they did not have good years in front of pulling people in or building their name or making people excited about the promotions. Riot had a shows that we'll probably see in 2025 by the way they put up the shows. Lucha Memories. This is a cycle for the Lucha Memories in 2023 is that they will put out their poster on Twitter. The show will happen. They will make a post on Facebook talking about what a disaster the show was, how they drew less people than ever. But you know what? We're just going to keep on trying and doing the same thing. It will retweet the poster. They will retweet the IWTV announcement that the show's been uploaded, and then that's all you'll hear about them until the next poster. The next poster will just be the same random combination of people with no feuds or no storylines or no building towards anything as the show before. Um, it's a if you still make the time for it, I hear it's good, but it's like a depressing situation. And overall, I don't think there's going to be big changes in the wrestling. The big stuff, I feel like the the pigs through And that style of wrestling grew less as the year went by, and there may have been exhaustion about it, especially with trying to add different characters and with the same idea. Like they brought in a bunch of rhinos in the EDC who were completely ripping off the pigs. Brought in a bunch of horror villains who were ripping off the rhinos. Um, and people were not excited about those acts as they were about the original concepts. And even the original concept itself seemed like they drew less, especially when there weren't like big AAA names around or other people who were considered bigger stars. That this may have had an expiration limit on their gimmick, but it's indie wrestling, it's Mexican wrestling, so they're going to keep on doing this up until far past the expiration date. They're going to keep trying to milk it to see if there's anything left before coming up with new ideas. Problem is that like that AAA tryout show, and I'm cheating because this is an early 2024 thing, not a 2023 thing. They found a whole bunch of interesting talent that was either not being pushed in Mexico City and those around the Indies, or wouldn't be pushed much at all. That you could see them on undercards and stuff. And when given the chance, they had good matches. But because the indie promotions feel like the traumas, the pigs, those kind of guys are the guys you need to draw on top. They're not really spending much time with these the guys that even AAA showed up on AAA's doorstep as really talented guys because they're not stars ready and they're not really promotions built on building new stars. They're just trying to extract value from the stars that want from the people who were stars or who have already created their own value. There's not an effort to add value to wrestlers right now. That's the problem with indie wrestling in general. The last thing to bring up, which is good because wow, it's already an hour. I'm sorry you had to sit this long. Is the kiss cam with kind of. It's not really just a kiss cam. It's the same old kiss cam. It's the Planete La Mascara cam. It's the bouncing balls there in Mexico. It's the general improved fan experience. CML has become more like what you would see. I went to a lot of minor league baseball games last and it's like the kind of entertainment you would see in between innings, or you might see at a basketball game. We're not seeing Red Panda yet throw the balls out onto her head and catch her that way, but they were trying to make it a more something where the energy level stays up between matches, something where it's more fan friendly, and so that and more they have a more controlled atmosphere. Down to what I'm pictured here, which is a called the CML Tunnel, which is a small covered area right next to Arena Mexico, right next to where they have the vendor merchandise stands that have been there forever, but they've created their own official merchandise stands where you can find official CML merchandise before the shows. You can talk with your favorite wrestler as they try to sell stuff from behind the table, and you can get that more. It's not exactly Disneyfied, but it's more um, cleaned up, more official, more professional atmosphere than you might get elsewhere. It it they're bringing a little bit more money by making it more tourist friendly, by finding more ways to sell things because this tunnel can be open before shows, where Arena Mexico is really open like an hour before a show, but they can have more merchandise going sold even earlier in that and after a show, and keep their building as secure as they want it to be. It doesn't feel like a trade off here is that like because it's becoming more professional, more upscale, more cleaned up, it feels a little less. There's like a gap between the experience you're going to get from going to Arena Mexico show than if you went to Arena San Juan when it was still open, or Arena Naucalpan, where it's more reflecting what Lucha Libre has been. While this is more trying to beautify it, so it's something that like a tourist feels more comfortable going to. For what CMLL's goal is going to be, they want it to be something that a tourist feels happy to be there, comfortable to be doing there, something that they will tell their friends to go to and come back. But it's also a increasingly different experience than you would go to if you went to a Lucha Libre show in the neighborhood. And I I think it's been a success to build this route for CMLL. So I can only imagine that they will continue to do these kind of things going forward and continue to move away from what Lucha Libre has been. I mean, you can always see it in both the style where there's no blood, that they go for more flashy stuff rather than more grimy brawling that they do, like the high spots that appeal to them, but they also going to try to make the experience and atmosphere more friendly to people who maybe aren't familiar to Mexico or aren't familiar with professional wrestling. So those are three things: CML going on the upswing, AAA going on it, having going the other way, CML focusing more on women than they have in any time. Um, Luchadors finding more success outside of Mexico, the Mexico independent scene being more recycling the same ideas over and over again, and CML becoming even more geared towards make a friendly atmosphere for fans. There are other stories that I could have talked about that really, some of them were big stories, some of them didn't really fit the idea of trends. Like the biggest story in Mexico this year was the situation of Stephanie Baker and Cortero being arrested for domestic violence and femicide, a situation that started in March and 9 months later has no resolution and has no resolution clearly in sight. That's been the most discussed thing. It's the most polarizing issue. It's the most tribalistic issue. If you thought people arguing about ratings or whatever WWE AEW controversy was tribal on Twitter, you have not seen how people have talked about the situation all year. But it's an isolated thing in terms of wrestling. In terms of society, you could make some big points about it, but it doesn't fit. I don't know where it's going. I don't know how it affects the bigger picture. I, as far as trends. Now, when it gets resoluted, when we know how it's going to turn out, if we ever know how it's going to turn out, then it may have bigger effects on Lucha Libre. But for this year, it was more it's a, a big story that did not have much effect on other stories going on. Similarly, in at least a less in a completely different way, the Kemonito issue with Samuel, where he walked out, he had obvious issues with payment over different things he had done in the character and issues over who owned the character, leading him to leave the promotion or refuse to sign the contract, and was another big story from the year. But it's fits the maybe it will come into next play next year when we talk more about we'll have more stories about people having trademark issues and who owns the gimmick and what does designing the gimmick versus inhabiting the gimmick mean. But in this case, it's kind of a weird unresolution situation where for a while it seemed like CML was about to replace the long-standing Kamo Nito character with another person in the same or similar suit, and then instead they debuted his new evil rival in Kamo Lito, but never addressed the Kamo Nito situation. And it kind of seems like maybe they're working things out behind the scenes and we'll have a positive resolution at the end. But it's something that got a lot of talk, but I don't know what it means until we get a resolution. On a lower level, CML revolving their promotion more around their Wednesday talk show, where every important angle, every big match announcement comes from a Wednesday show that streams live on the internet at 4 p.m. And if and that show is just about those big stories has been a big change. It's like the creative hub of the promotion in a way that has never been before, when it was just like a light chat show where we talked about ideas, we threw out angles we wanted to do, but it almost seemed like the bookers took joy in making sure that those angles never went down, to complete 180 where everything that all the angles they want to announce and the stuff they want to tease for the future all comes from one show that happens every Wednesday. It's a different way to run a wrestling promotion, but it's one that has clearly worked for them this year. Um, one that another story from the year. This is more of a trend, is that we've seen YouTube influencers become a bigger thing. I don't mean the YouTube influencer who was supposed to have a match in Triple A Monterey and did not have a match. Well, that's a whole nother story. But I mean the bloggers who talk about news, who talk about things they believe are news, just make stuff up, have become a bigger thing that promotions have started to react to. They have got great influence from sections of the fan base, have been and anti against sections of the fan base. They more than message board posts, more than people who write blogs or people who do news sites. It seems like the people who are putting up these YouTube videos or putting up TikTok videos are having a bigger outreach, or like the preferred outreach for people who are interested in wrestling who are not getting their wrestling information on other places. And it's not, it has not taken off to the point where like a promotion has revolved around them or strongly reacted them, but they're clearly, or at least they haven't publicly reacted them, but they're clearly having influence on different stories like this. The Cajero story is something that's been pushed a lot by these YouTube influencers. And I think that's going to be, with no really alternative media outlet, I think what the people say in who aren't the best stories, aren't really that attached to telling full stories or true stories, continue, but they tell sensational stories. And so when fans looking for information can't find anything from official sources, but they can tell people telling them what they want to hear, they they've gravitated those people, and those YouTubers have become more powerful, I think, in the last year than they have before, and it probably continue that way, unless something else comes, because an alternative comes up, and that may be something to watch for 2024. Um, to similar thing, but to a lesser extent, one of the big stories from the end of the year was a Landlover Vampiro podcast where they dished dirt about Land's time in AAA and people he liked and people he didn't like, and maybe stories that were true and maybe stories that weren't completely true. And it became a viral sensation because people weren't used to seeing big stars of Lucha Libre talk about the inner workings of Lucha Libre in that way. It's still a protected and kayfabe sport, and it became such a sensation that I wonder if we're going to see other people try to take advantage of that and try to be either telling their real story or telling what they want people to believe their real story in the same way to catch the same attention, because a that kind of stuff has obviously proven successful for U.S. wrestlers over the years, and even currently, where there's a dozen podcasts with people telling both their history of what wrestling was and sneaking in or making it obsessively about history, but actually it's about the current events that they want to weigh in on and trying to influence things that way. And that's obviously worked for a lot of U.S. wrestlers and people who work with them. And it's only a matter of time before someone tries to adopt the strategy in Mexico. The Vampiro and Lover case is like a test case to see if that worked, and see if that may work. Another story that may come up in 2024 more is that AAA had, since the pandemic, pretty much many of the wrestlers have been like freelancing for them, not under contract, um, working show to show, handshake agreements, very Mexico style, because just the situation for like no one knew how often people are going to work or how fast people are going to work coming out of the pandemic. And so there was a little bit more freedom in where people could work or what outside dates they can work. And you can see with the talent departures or people getting signed a contract at AAA that that's changing. They're going to have a much more strict control of the wrestlers and how the wrestlers are going to feel about that, how AAA is going to enforce that, or if they're going to they're going to say they're going to enforce that and then change their mind a few months later, which happened with Hijo del Vikingo in 2023, is probably going to shape some announcements of people staying going or people being saying things about being unhappy or not, or making complaints or whatever. So I think there'll probably be some situation where people thought they had permission to do something and they did not, and we'll have unhappiness about that. But also may mean that AAA can rely on having people around more often or can control a little bit, be happier where the people are allowed to work and that they promote AAA more in doing so. I think that's going to be a trend to watch. And the last thing is a minor thing from 2023 is that, and maybe it'll become a bigger, but it fits with some other stuff we talked about, where some people have not, that CMLL is focused on a fewer group of people than they have before, and some of the veterans have been left out. And one of the veterans that's surprisingly left out the last year is Ultimo Guerrero, who really was around, was part of big shows, but not big parts of big shows, was often like the third most important person in this three-man trio, is still on CMLL shows already, but clearly somehow, for some reason, is not on the A team anymore. He's a he's still used, he's still respected in the booking, but he's clearly dropped for some reason. And for a guy who has been on top of that promotion, has been the lead Rudo for that promotion, for a very long time how that's going to work out, or if that's just like a 1 year blip and he'll be back on the front line next year or something. I think if I had to throw one more on here that I probably should throw on there would be probably Andrade's return to CMLL, something that people would not have expected going in. But both him and Metallic came in. Metallic came in, made no positive impression, and will not be returning. Andrade will also be not returning, but he seemed to have a fun time. Everyone enjoyed him. He made a great impression, and put someone over in a big way on the way out. So that was it's not something that's going to mean much going forward unless we'll look back and say Andrade coming to CMLL was a forerunner of other people coming from AEW to CMLL. But I'm not even sure that's what was going on. It was just a fun time, a fun memory from 2023, even if it doesn't mean that much going forward. That's all I got, which thankfully it's good. It's 1:15 in this video. It's very long. If you want to follow me and somehow you found this video without knowing how to follow me already, I don't think it's possible. That cannot be a real thing, but there's my Twitter stuff. I think I might try to get into Instagram this year, but just like post stuff on stories or something. Not actually like take photos that aren't photos. It doesn't make any sense. Um, you also, again, I have a website, but like how could you do this video without knowing where my website is? None of this makes any sense. I'm just babbling now. It's been 75 minutes. I'm not built to talk this long. Thank you for watching. I love any feedback. If I can get any feedback that isn't you made a typo, can you fix that typo? Like if it's like I agree with your point, but also here's the thing to think about. That's the feedback I really want. Or you made a really bad point here. Here's really how you should think about it. I love those feedback. Please give me those feedback. Otherwise, probably do another video for Fantastic Mania. I have a couple ideas that I need to do. Will I get them done? Who knows? But I appreciate you making it to the end of this one, and I will talk to you again eventually someday.